I'm not sure what's happening other than some craziness. All right, I'm Tom Glatt, and welcome to Glatt Consulting's. There we.
Inaugural? We just had an inauguration. This is inaugural.
Yes, this is our inaugural end of days podcast, and perhaps we shouldn't have gotten into the end of days bar cart so early. But anyway, hey, we're here talking a little bit about credit union life. Our program today. Well, once again, I'm Tom Glatt, my colleague.
Matt Griffiths. Yep.
We're going to talk about three things today, Matt, right? We're going to talk about election and inauguration. We're going to talk about the new normal that exists now. And we're going to talk about mergers. And the reason we're talking about these three things right now is because we are at the start of a new year, looking out ahead. And these three things were on every credit union's list, at least our client credit union's list of planning concerns, thinking about the year or two ahead. So we're going to hit these three things and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah, like you said, Tom, I mean, these are the things we've been hearing. And, you know, you and I talk so much off camera about these things. And I think we just kind of thought, yeah, it might be interesting to put some of this on camera. Maybe not just some of our clients perhaps would be interested in hearing it, but I think it also, for us, it's a nice way to capture some thoughts and start some dialogue and kind of get the wheels turning on some things. So it's I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. And so our format for those who are new to this, which actually includes the two of us, is again, three topics. We'll hit each for about 10 minutes and then go to the next one. And then we'll just do a little bit of wind up at the end there. So I'm going to start this clock here, a little sort of pardon the interruption reference to the timer. So election inauguration, that's our first one. And obviously this is January 21st, Thursday. Yesterday was the day for regime change, new administration, whatever you want to call it. What was your take on the day, Matt?
You know, it was surreal, honestly, as I sat there and watched it, to see, you know, we've been in this kind of pandemic world so long, you wouldn't think that the masks still grab your attention, but watching that event yesterday and everybody is masked, the way everybody was spaced out, even, you know, seeing Mike Pence there and Donald Trump wasn't there. To me, when I watched it with my kids and my wife, it seemed like a very surreal event. That's what kept registering with me. Not to mention it looked frigid cold, but that aside, it was just, I thought it was kind of strange. I mean, I don't know. What did you think?
Two things come to mind based on your comments. First off, the mask thing was a little surreal to see it that way, but I was watching Amy Klobuchar come up there and she did the whole unhook one ear, you know, and try to get the mask off the other ear. And it's such a familiar gesture now that it's sort of lost that little bit of, that's odd, particularly for like you and me, when we've gone out to clients, we've had to deal with having a mask on, taking it off to make a presentation or to talk to a particular group. So I appreciated the normalcy and the surrealness, if you will. Now, the other thing is, to your point about it being cold, I'm going to share with you my favorite takeaway from yesterday. Little screen share here. This is Vern feeling the cold, right? Isn't he? I mean, Twitter is a great creative place to be at the moment. Different vibe in Twitter right now, but here we go. Bundled up Bernie Sanders is the biggest meme from the inauguration. What is this, from The Sopranos or something like that?
Yes, that's Paulie Walnuts there.
So we got Bernie and Paulie Walnuts. This is one of my favorites here. You got Bernie and Forrest Gump. Here's Bernie sitting behind Johnny, obviously at a Browns game. And then he's, you know, factored into all these wonderful artistic things here. And this one is just ideal. And I think I'm going to go back in history here. So our families have gone to New York City together. And I do believe we've seen the real version of this picture at MoMA, maybe. I believe one of the museums. And I don't recall Bernie actually being in the original. So
yeah, it's a nice addition though. I like it. Yeah. I mean, he looked right at home with his mittens and his gray drab coat on. You know, he looked more comfortable there than anybody else. I haven't shared this with you, so this is a bit of a surprise. I will tell you my favorite thing about yesterday was this gentleman, the lectern sanitizer. Did you notice him?
I did not.
In between speakers? And sometimes I think he almost pushed the speakers out of the way, both the outgoing and the incoming speakers, to get his job done. But man, he was on point yesterday.
The worst feedback you can get is you had one job, but you didn't do it. So he was going to get it done no matter what. Now he does look a little bit like Dennis Hastert, former Speaker of the House.
He does. Yeah, he does. He sure does.
So maybe that is Denny there. No, maybe not. But
I glommed onto that. I saw him in the beginning. I just thought it was hysterical because, and again, you mentioned Twitter. You can go on here and find little montages of him, and he literally is almost, elbowing people out of the way to get up and disinfect. And they were referring to him as the sanitizer in chief and the disinfector in chief and all these sorts of things. So
who is it? Do we even know?
I don't know his name. I confess I didn't look it up. So I don't know, just a lowly civil servant, I guess, doing his job and
getting it done.
Yeah, getting it done.
People in the trenches that do the work right there. All right, so Biden's inaugurated yesterday. It's a day of fanfare, and he ends the day in the office with his pen and a stack of things to sign. And of course, part of that, affects credit unions, affects the banking industry, in addition to the appointments that he's making for office. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of the appointments that are definitely of concern or of interest to the credit union community, our clients. Let's start with the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. What do we have there? What's Biden thinking with the CFPB?
Sure. So let me pull this up. Oops. Okay. There we go. Sorry about that, Tom. You know, but anybody watching this doesn't know, at our firm, you are the technologically savvy one, and you are kind enough to drag me along.
Can I just tell you, though, that technological savvy failed us with the intro music there that was playing over itself and over itself. But anyway, proceed. I'll take the compliment, but I'm not sure I lived up to it today.
No. So Rohit Chopra is the nominee for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And, he was one of the, you can read the article here, but I was, reading up on it. So the name may ring a bell because he was one of the early hires by Elizabeth Warren to help build the Bureau. So he's got this mentality or call to service, in his DNA. I chose this article. It's got an interesting little tagline. You can see he was the former student loan watchdog. But I think this nomination does indicate kind of the pendulum swinging back into a more pro-regulatory mindset. And Rohit, I think, definitely supports that opinion.
Yeah, so he's coming home then, right? So he was there at CFPB before, and now he's back in the fold, perhaps as its leader.
Yes.
Okay. It's interesting. The CFPB. Well, let me back up. As you know, the election of 2020 was listed as a strategic concern for almost every one of our clients, and it was more or less the idea of preparing for two different paths. If you're going with the Trump administration, you kind of know what the regulatory infrastructure pertaining to banking anyway was going to look like. And there was assumptions about what it would look like under Biden. And now we're seeing maybe some of those assumptions proven, maybe some a little different than we expected. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, the kind of the plus or minus, if you will, on the Biden administration was likely a little more lean towards a regulation. And this would be one of those examples here where we see a promise of perhaps additional regulation or tighter regulation going forward. One quick thing I'll mention on that, Matt, as you know, we have a client on the West Coast. When the Trump administration came in and started to loosen the regulatory infrastructure a little bit, kind of defang the CFPB to some extent. This credit union, about a little over 100 million in assets, was a little disappointed in that. They didn't feel that the CFPB regulation was as much a hindrance as it was a leveler of the playing field between the larger financial institutions that they compete with day in and day out. And here we're talking about, the Wells Fargos, the B of A's, and the like. So interestingly enough, again, here's one financial institution that says the CFPB is not a threat as they saw it from their vantage point. But that's certainly not the norm view, if you will, from the credit union community.
Yeah, it is interesting. I guess, it depends on where you fall. And to some extent, they're talking their own book a little bit. They're interested in what helps their institution, which is, normal and natural.
That's right.
You and I were talking about Mr. Chopra before. So he has a focus on student loan. And that's something, student loan debt, that has been in the news a lot, with Biden making some comments about, I guess he's already extended deferrals or, interest or payment deferrals for student loan debt, right?
I think that's right. And we've got just a few seconds left in this particular section. Not that we can't change the rules, but I'm gonna grab the screen from you for just a second. Yeah. And just to dovetail into that idea about talking about his other nomination that's been getting some serious news lately, and that's Janet Yellen to lead Treasury. Now, of course, Janet Yellen, former chair of the Federal Reserve Board. Powell holds that position now. So a couple of things that come out of the Janet Yellen nomination, of course, is her statements in her testimony the other day or her confirmation testimony about kind of go big or go home with the stimulus. So she's on the record right now saying we need to have this exceptionally ambitious stimulus program, the 1.9 trillion that's referenced here in the article. This is a Bloomberg article, by the way. So yeah, Yellen is out there talking about stimulus. The other thing that is interesting, and this goes back to your comment about how these institutions are now CFPB with student loans and deferral of interest and the like, and Yellen at Treasury thinking about income inequality, which he's talked about for years. You begin to see maybe the unfolding of a desire to create a regulatory infrastructure that better supports, at least from their perspective, those that are more economically disadvantaged. So perhaps higher taxes for more wealthy folks. That's definitely in the package and some of the legislation that we know will be proposed. Maybe an additional regulatory focus on the interests and efforts of financial institutions to live up to some diversity, equity, and inclusion ideals. So on this particular note, we do know that a number of our clients have really embraced the idea of DEI as a strategy, not in a disingenuous fashion, but in an authentic fashion, which what I mean by that is, if this is the way the world is going, we're already doing that. How do we tell this story so that people know we've been with them all along, that we're just not new to the game, that we as credit unions really take our mission and mandate to serve our members and the communities in which we live well and to the best of our ability. So, again, maybe the regulatory regime is not so far afield from credit union ideals, and we won't see too much that's negatively influencing the credit union community. But, again, there are some things out there that might. So let's end on this note here, this idea of stimulus, Matt. How likely is it? And is it a good thing for credit unions, or are we thinking this is a concern?
Depends on how you look at it. I think there's a general overall push that is pro-stimulus. However, I think the amount and the timing seem to be, the sticking point. I'll just grab the screen from you real quick. Here's an article from the Boston Globe. Skeptical response from Republican moderates. You see Mitt Romney there. It also mentions Lisa Murkowski. Not to mention, so, with a split Senate, I don't think it would be impossible to believe that maybe even a couple of the more conservative Democrats might even have a problem with a $1.9 trillion spending package on the heels of a $900 billion package that some feel we haven't even seen the full effects of, or it's hard to gauge what's needed or how it's working so quickly. That said, it's Washington. I think there's going to be it's like a gravitational pull to spend money and to want to please constituents and all of that sort of thing. But I don't think it's a slam dunk. And they were also, I don't want to get above my pay grade here with, procedural rules, but I guess if they can get 60 senators on board, it can expedite the process. And also, so they're trying to build a consensus, and they probably will, and probably everybody's posturing. But, this is, I hate to say, is it a unique event we're living in? Yeah, in a lot of ways, but people are trying to figure out how to navigate it, politicians included. And I think a lot of them are having trouble trying to stick to any sort of fiscal positions that they have, or fiscal responsibility positions, and at the same time trying to support the economy and the people as needed. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
No doubt. And I'll tell you this, and I'll reset the clock here for our new normal discussion, because that's the next thing. What is the new normal operating environment, member experience, behaviors that we're looking for? But one final note on that stimulus piece, in talking with clients again, financial performance, of course, is always a concern when you're a financial institution. The stimulus impact last year on asset growth was phenomenal. For those of the credit unions that follow our health score, you saw the incredible triple-digit percent change in our score just for asset growth alone. If we see continued stimulus like this, then there will be fairly decent pressure on capital, on net worth. And for the purpose of getting through 2020, examiners were telling credit unions, don't worry about it. We're aware of what's going on. But anecdotally, we're hearing from some clients now this year who are going through the exam process, having examiners take a little different tone, which is more, what's your capital plan? How are you going to manage this going forward? How are you going to ensure that your net worth stays high? And quite frankly, what are you going to do with the money? I think you and I talked earlier today about larger institutions maybe now telling their best customers even to go find other places to take their money.
That's right. Yeah. I've living in Charlotte and have lots of friends that work, big banking city, and friends that work there. And I hear stories where large banks have large customers with lots of money, and they're literally telling them to take some of those deposits elsewhere. So it's interesting. Obviously, people within the industry understand that and why it is, but some people, I think it is counterintuitive. If they don't think of it in the balance sheet impact, it doesn't necessarily make sense. Why would you tell them to take their money somewhere else? But like you said, those net worth concerns will come, and the regulators pausing, that will end. Everybody's kind of, we saw all the measures and loan abatement, all these accommodations to get through will have an expiration date, and we just don't know when that is.
Well, and this is such we're eating into new normal, which I think is important in its own right. But this whole, what are we looking for in the coming year? Marry the idea of a little more stringent regulation, maybe a little more paying attention to interchange income, overdraft protection, those kinds of products and services, kind of get back on track, tightening those things up. Doing a little more digging into what's going on in an individual institution, marry that with the inability to get loans out at a decent yield, shrinking margins, and then an abundance of cash pressuring capital. Likely to be an interesting year. Now, we thought this past year was going to be a disaster, right? Mm-hmm. With rampant charge-offs and delinquencies, but people rallied. Forbearance was the word of the day in 2020 in terms of loans. Managing credit risk. We were all singing Kumbaya, let's help each other out, outside of the political sphere, of course. But does that persist this year, or we see sort of that pent up maybe risk that exists in loan portfolios?
It cannot go on indefinitely.
Yeah,
for sure. And the other side of that equation is, how long does this environment last? So as we talk about the new normal. Are these permanent? Are these temporary? Some of these changes in behavior, right?
Yeah. So new normal behaviors and impact. One of the big things that we had, I mean, a conversation almost at every credit union was, you know, what does our future look like? Are we going to be an institution with a transient workforce, not meaning people coming in and leaving, but just, sometimes they're in the office, sometimes they're not. Or will members come into branches like they did before? So that concern exists. It's very real for many credit unions. And it's kind of odd to see how the member behaviors that you would expect would be consistent and similar from one credit union to the other really aren't. So I don't know what the new normal is, but just one anecdote. We've got one client in the state of Texas that you and I talked to a couple months ago. They said October was the best October they've ever had. And it occurred in the pandemic environment after they opened the branches back up. So when those branches became available, members came out and started doing business. And mind you, this particular credit union does not engage in indirect lending. So their members were waiting to come in and do business with this credit union in person. Now, we have another client in Maryland, as you know, that they are very excited about their wise use of COVID time as they see it to reinvest or to invest in a lot of new digital tools because they see their members behaving differently. So yeah, just generally speaking, what do you think new normal looks like for members?
I think there's the obvious, ones, and distribution channels and digital, no matter how you slice it, is only going to become more important and influential. You hear a lot of opinions about branches and branch strategy in the extremes, from the death of the branch and people like you mentioned that are still seeing very positive effects from operating branches. So, I always tend to believe that the reality lands somewhere in the middle of the extremes, but it brings into focus an interesting, with respect to branch management, how I hardly ever go into a branch, but I had the occasion to go into one the other day, and I had some cash to deposit, which I never do, but I did this one time. So I go, and the drive-through line was insane. So I was like, okay, I'll risk it. I'll go inside. I went inside. It was even worse. I mean, what a miserable experience. So I think, right, there you go. I think there's an intent.
You just made me think of that.
Yeah. So how are credit unions specifically going to be proactive or reactive? Are they going to try to drive consumer behavior and try to figure out what makes the best operational sense? Or are they going to feed off what their customers want? I don't think we know this yet, but it's going to be interesting to see it play out. It'll be some sort of hybrid, no doubt. People will glom on to different strategies.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, so what's interesting about this particular screenshot here, this is a Wall Street Journal article from back, I guess I could scroll down and get the specifics, back in July. All right. So this is a July view. We're kind of thinking that the worst of the pandemic may be behind us, except for those that we're thinking about a little further ahead into the fall and winter. So in July, we're talking about member behaviors change. And as you mentioned, going in the drive-through. My suspicion is if you have a drive-through, you're probably good. Right? If you want to maintain the branch environment, you're probably good. My guess is your in-branch traffic will continue to decline. But here again, you just said you went in both into drive-through. It's like Chick-fil-A, right? You go through the drive-through, it's just as long as going in. So
right.
What's the lesser of two evils? But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I do think really that branches will cease to be as incredibly relevant as they've been in our history, simply because you can do so many avant-garde things using mobile technology. Case in point, we got a New York client that we're working with, longtime client. They're in video banking. They're putting their friendly faces out there for members to engage with. via, the proverbial mobile phone banking connection. And if that is as acceptable to consumers, because now this environment of COVID is forcing them to try something new, forcing them to, they might find they like it. And then why would they go into a branch?
Right. I mean, they're definitely, the secular decline was already in motion, likely, certainly has accelerated. And, in conjunction with the habits or the behaviors of members that has been affected by the pandemic, with that, you have paired the ascent of the technology solutions that continue to get better and easier. So, a lot of credit union members are mature, right? There's a constant push to get younger members into credit unions, and a lot of the loyal credit union members are older than you and me, and may not embrace the technology solutions.
So can I just tell you that for many years, the average age of credit union members has been 47. So when you say older than you and me, I'm hoping that's true, because that would have meant, a little higher age, and we're not at that.
Right.
But anyway, proceed.
But I mean, there's, and maybe it's perception more than reality. I just, we constantly talk to members, or credit unions, and they're obsessed with, pulling in the new members and the younger members, because, you want to convert them to lifelong members. So we all get that. But, I think even you're very technologically, advanced. I'm middle of the road, but, like my in-laws, my wife's parents, the tools are getting to the point where they're very comfortable using them. It's so simple to make your mobile deposits and do everything else, that you kind of have, the pandemic is affecting your behaviors. And at the same time, the solutions are so good that it's like this perfect storm of, branch diminished importance. I don't know.
Yeah. So a couple of things here that come to mind. One, when we think about going back to election inauguration, executive action, I'll just point your attention to the right-hand side of this image on the screen here.
Right.
This is in July, when a mask could be freely dispensed on the side of the desk and picked up later when somebody might be looking at you. So my guess is, going forward, this mask, even in a drive-through environment, would probably be on that lady's face.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy clearly doesn't have one on.
Right.
He doesn't even have one over here. So, but one of the problems that we see is part of the dynamic of building relationships is that conversant experience you have with people, where you're asking them questions to help you understand what goals and dreams the person across from you has, so that you can match up your products and services to support them. Those credit unions that are taking a cue from, say, the Apple onboarding experience, or looking to see what SoFi is doing, or some of these other fintechs, are probably going to be doing better, because they're not just trying to figure out how to process transactions in a mobile world. They're actually trying to think about how to develop relationships in a mobile world. And that's a different skill set. So our 10 minutes on this subject is up. But we do get into, let me stop sharing here. We do get into this sort of dynamic. If you can't build relationships, if you can't grow, if you can't add new members, if you're not inspiring them to come join, and if you're in a world where you've got high capital, you've got a lot of deposits, diminishing income, it's no doubt that you'll see an increase in merger activity, or at least an interest in merger conversations occurring. So that's our third topic. So I'll reset our clock, even though we're a little behind schedule, but it's our podcast. Who cares? So what do you think the merger outlook is for the coming year, or say the coming 2 years?
Well, speaking from our recent experience, I can without question say that as a topic, merger strategy has increased significantly. So if I would say, to that, if clients or credit unions did not have a strategy in place, or were kind of passively involved. If somebody contacted them, maybe they would have a conversation. Those clients or those credit unions are now saying, okay, maybe we need to have a more formal strategy here. And what does our board really think about this as a possibility for whatever you're attempting to address? I would also say the credit unions that were engaged in mergers as a strategy or an operational foundation, that the activity has also increased for them. So I think, there's been a general increased expectation of activity. That certainly is what we're hearing. We were talking earlier, and you had, I don't want to steal your thunder, and frankly, I can't, because you articulated it better than I could, about, if a credit union was controlling their own destiny, perhaps. If we're in this environment where there's going to be pockets of challenges, and the interesting thing about this economy and this pandemic is there's been kind of a bifurcation. You have some clear winners, and you're going to have some clear people that are struggling. The credit unions that find themselves perhaps or in either end, this offers, mergers. I think this environment is offering them a great opportunity to use mergers as a strategy to help their members, whether you're on the surviving side or, to your point earlier, and I'll let you expound upon it, kind of controlling your own destiny if you're maybe in the position you don't want to be in.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. I think, though, there's just a heightened interest in mergers because some of it's shark in the water, kind of, or blood in the water, circling sharks kind of mindset, that we know there are credit unions that are struggling. So that just means that merger opportunities will persist. We also see anecdotal evidence just with like a PenFed credit union. What do we see? 18 mergers in 5 years, something like that. So there are credit unions that are certainly creating a marketplace of interest in merger because they're always mentioned in merger articles and what have you. But yeah, where we're talking about earlier is this idea of some of the smaller credit unions. They're always under attack from larger credit unions wanting to come in and help them serve their members better. And as you and I always advise credit unions, if you're looking to create partnerships with people, the worst way to do it is to knock on the door and say, you suck at what you do, so let us help you. That's a bad door opener for the most part. But yeah, let me jump into this screen share here, because this, I think, is where we're going with this part of the conversation. Where am I? Is this the one I wanted? That's not the one I wanted. What did I want here? What do you see? I don't know what I see.
A blank screen.
A blank screen?
Tom Glatt there we go. Now we're back to the two of us.
Here we are. This is what I was looking for. This is the NCUA press release listing here for the beginning of January. And right here, you've got Indianapolis Newspaper Federal Credit Union conserved. And then you've got CO Federal Credit Union conserved. And this is the 5th and the 14th of the year. So let me change the share here. I'm going to go to another view into our health score system, which is right here. So, we're talking here in this particular case, if I can get to the right spot. Okay, you should see the health score screen. So here we got those two credit unions that I just mentioned, a $6 million, $6.6 million credit union, and a $4.4 million credit union, tiny credit unions, 1,100 members here, 780 members here. This one, the smaller credit union, actually had a branch and 2 full-time employees. Interesting. The newspaper credit union, no branches, no employees. Both had very limited leadership there. Health score for one was about average, decent net worth. The health score for the other was pretty poor. So where you were going with that control your own destiny comment there, if you're a small credit union, people are going to knock on your door. That one bad quarter can wipe your credit union out. So what is your take on mergers? What are the perspectives that you have about what constitutes a successful merger? And when would you start executing a look, right? So that you are the ones controlling the outcome of maybe what might not be a great situation. In this particular case, the NCUA obviously has taken over these two credit unions, and the members now have no voice in what happens to the two institutions. So what we're talking about here in this particular case is every credit union, regardless of size, should understand that mergers are a viable and relevant strategy, shouldn't shy away from them, shouldn't be angry that people are asking about mergers as opportunities, because every credit union should already know where they stand on what would constitute a good merger and when a good merger should be consummated or executed.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. And I think, as you and I have discussed many times, philosophically, have the conversations, whichever end of the spectrum you are with respect to mergers, having those conversations, building those relationships with other credit unions is only a good thing. Those may be seeds that you plant that, bear fruit in the future. You just don't know. And if the last 18 months hasn't shown us how quickly things can get turned upside down, what can? So yeah, to your point, if you're small and you're sick and tired of everybody pounding your phone lines and your door wanting to merge with you, you can handle that in a way where you have some conversations and build some relationships, even if you're not interested in that as an alternative right now, because maybe things can happen. You might find yourself in that position. Like you said, now those members don't have a choice. They're at the mercy of the regulators. And
they'll probably
all trust the regulators to do the right thing. But this cooperative environment, the members are supposed to be in charge, right?
Yeah, I believe that's right.
Let me give you a pop question quiz. I'm sorry. I know we didn't run over this earlier, but you and I have talked about this before.
Okay.
So, an economic shock that we just went through or are still in, and looking at some recent economic shocks that you can kind of look at, and, not just your average or not just your ordinary recession, but, the financial crisis. And maybe, we'll just start there. When I'm having conversations with credit unions about mergers, they're still typically one-sided in that everybody is looking to acquire and be the survivor, whatever that means. And how long after the economic shock is it before you see merger activity really pick up? Because it's not in the beginning or even the middle, because I think people are trying to, get entrenched and figure out how to navigate the environment. So if we can use history as a predictor of the future, based on your experience in the financial crisis, when do you think, are we entering that period right now where the merger activity is going to come to fruition? Certainly the interest is there. Are we going to start seeing really the executed, the mergers, the numbers tick up?
Yeah, that's a good question there. So what I was doing is I realized one thing when I made that little view of those two credit unions, I probably impacted all of our merger tool feeds. So had to take that off. Otherwise, everybody's thinking, what? We only have two credit unions in the world that we can think about merging with, and they're both conserved. So what I was looking for here is the average. I don't have all those details in front of me. Okay. History is a guide. Going back to the Great Recession, there were certainly conservatorships happening as the recession was in its worst days. The regulators coming in, taking over credit unions because no one wants to take a risk on some institution whose assets are extremely bad. So the regulator is the savior of last resort. But where we are right now, the credit union community is very well capitalized, and that capital allows you to bide your time a little bit. And for credit unions that weren't in that, it's a disaster right now mode, they had enough capital to kind of get through the worst of the recession, but then started seeing lingering effects start to bubble up a little bit. Their capital allowed them to kind of hold off those conversations for about 2 years from the worst part of the recession, or maybe a year and a half. Yeah. So right now we've got a very well capitalized credit union community, and the forbearance strategies and stimulus of last year sort of really, yes, we've been suffering, I'm not downplaying deaths from COVID and all that stuff, but from a financial institution standpoint, we've been able to push off the suffering that occurs on a balance sheet and an income statement because of COVID to some extent. So if that starts picking up this year, if we start seeing that, then it may well be in 2022 that we see a ramp up in real merger activity, not the one-offs that we see happening now, but fire sale of merger opportunities.
So even when maybe green shoots of a good economy are springing up, credit unions are still they're more tethered to the negative effects that have been mitigated, or to what you said, pushed off. Mm-hmm. They weren't solved. A lot of what we're doing now is, I guess, biding time, right? That's, I think, been kind of the playbook with loan abatements and forgiveness and everything, is just keep in enhanced unemployment benefits. Let's just keep this thing on the rails until we get a vaccine, until we get, on and on and on. And then maybe we can have I don't want to say soft landing, but you know what I mean. So that's interesting that, there's a lag effect. Definitely.
Yeah. So to your point, I'm just going to throw this up here. I found what I was looking for. So in the industry summary in our health score, this is as you know, the database view we share with all of our health score subscribers. Here's the percent change in the net worth score starting in June 30. It did start to go down. We started to see that net worth pressure, but it wasn't because we were seeing write-offs, right? That was one of the things that definitely influenced some of our capital back in the day. A lot of it has to do with that asset growth. So where's the percent change in asset growth? 132% change in asset growth. So I think if you see, a continued trend, negativity there in net worth because deposits are coming in, we can't unload them, our income is depressed, continued quarantines and lockdowns and what have you, keep people either underemployed, unemployed, or unable to spend to generate that interchange income, then I think that's where you see that pickup for sure.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And again, we hope none of that comes to fruition. And, seeing that report, you'll allow me a shameless plug to anybody who may watch this or hear it or whatever. That's an excerpt from our health score report, which is a beautiful, comprehensive report that we produce quarterly that you can have at no charge. All you have to do is shoot us an email and we'll send it to you with information about benchmarking you against the industry, your credit union against the industry. You can also look at a watch list, so to speak, of other institutions that you'd like to keep an eye on. So that's my only shameless plug, but it's free. So it's not really a plug, right? Or I guess it is a plug.
Yeah, it's a plug for free. So
yeah, right. It's not
a public service.
It's a small ask.
Yeah,
but it's free. It's useful. It's great. You get a lot of historical information. So please, if anybody's watching this, email us and ask for the health score.
Yeah, report. Well, and the aggregation of trend data is helpful because then you can see what the influences really are that you have to appreciate. And here in this context, talking about mergers, if you start to see that score go down.
That's right.
And this is an odd year because I would have thought it turned out differently. The health score going into the Great Recession dropped a lot more prior to the actual recession unfolding. So before we even knew recession as a new word in the in recent memory, of course we know what recessions are, but the health score was showing the suffering or the pain or some challenges in the balance sheets and income statements of credit unions. So we're definitely seeing that. We saw that before COVID, and we've talked about that before in our health score updates. But again, to echo your point, get the health score, because you can see some interesting trends that might inspire you as a credit union leader to dig into them a little bit. Like, hey, what's going on in my state? Is it dropping? And if it is, what does that mean? Merger opportunity, merger discussion? Do I need to change the way I'm thinking about credit risk protection and the like? So anyway, there's another extension of the PSA.
It's a great entree to dig into your financials and look at ratios, and not just look at the nominal financials and nominal amounts, but look at them in a ratio format, so you can really compare apples to apples against your peers, geographically, size, however you want to look at it. You can slice and dice the number, the figures any way you want. So it's
right.
I'll shut up now, but it's free and it's great.
Okay, so we're a little past our time. I think we had said we were going to do 45 minutes, give or take, but that's all right. That leads me to explain the choice of end of days for the title of our podcast. It's inspired by a couple of things. One, at the end of the day, you get to the end of the day and you kind of relax and talk a little bit about what's going on, to shoot the breeze. But this is also an opportunity for us to talk about an interesting behavioral change that COVID inspired. One of which was an appreciation for small business in an individual local community. So we've got a really interesting thing we're going to do here, which is an addiction, or I don't know what you'd call it, a hobby.
Interest. Hobby.
An interest.
Maybe addiction's not the best.
Maybe not.
Might not be the best.
Yeah. So a couple of things with the COVID summer and the winter of discontent that COVID inspired as well, which we're in right now, is again that appreciation for small business. Small businesses are suffering; they can't serve as many people. They're restricted in capacity and what have you. And American consumers have found their way to small businesses, have been supporting them in interesting ways as best they can, whether it's ordering a meal to be delivered via Grubhub or something like that, or patronizing a small business. But the other thing is, and we talked about this earlier today, Matt, is that COVID has given us all a lot of extra time to explore new interests, new passions, dive deeper into different things in life. So one of the things that you and I definitely have an interest in is the finer spirits that are produced by distillers around the country. And this is an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about those two things. One, our passions and our interests, but also the opportunity to support and mention small businesses. So right down the road from where I live here in Wilmington, as you know, Matt, there is a place that's relatively new called End of Days. It's a distillery. And here is a rum blend that they made. So they do usually clear liquors, rum, clear rum, gin, and vodka. But they aged some rum in bourbon barrels. This is called a barrel rested rum. And you and I both like bourbons, whiskeys, scotch. So end of days, end of times, whatever we want to call this, seems like a good opportunity to both support small businesses and to pour an end of days drink, which I'm going to do right now. So I don't want to offend anybody. So if you're offended by...
Well, it's after we babbled on long enough that it's after 5 o'clock now.
That's right. So
and Tom was kind enough, being friends and coworkers, we exchange Christmas gifts. So there was my Christmas gift, and
there it is.
My gift to Tom, I think he's already finished, which is interesting. But
I was interested in it, Matt.
Yeah, right. right. But so, so here's, in the spirit of these, these small businesses out there, definitely, I think we all appreciate the small businesses more now than we did in the beginning. And not everybody maybe was dealt with equally business wise in the pandemic. What was the term? Gosh, what is it? The essential worker, an essential business,
Yeah.
is that a bit arbitrary who we're deeming essential, So, and a lot of the small businesses, I think, found themselves on the wrong side of the essential line. So, yeah, I think we believe do what you can to support them. Tom and I are, and this is an easy way, admittedly, to support a small business.
It is an easy way. So interestingly enough, we stumbled across End of Days for a couple of reasons. One, I think the founder graduated from University of North Carolina at Wilmington here in Wilmington, of course, and they were shut down like so many bars and what have you. And so what did they do? They kind of shifted to using their distilling process to create hand sanitizer early on. So when you couldn't get the essential supplies from the essential providers like hand sanitizer and other personal elements, here they were out there supporting the community. Interestingly enough, I think they were probably one of those ones that was caught up briefly in the FDA. Was it the FDA that came down on distillers that were making hand sanitizers, and so they had to pay like a $10,000 fee or something for the coffee? I think that was waived, but nonetheless.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's all this stuff is happening real time. So, it's interesting to see it play out. For us, like Tom said, so Tom and I, we're good friends and have been for a long time, and we work together as well. So that leads to a lot of tangential conversations. And, we talk first thing in the morning, middle of the day, sometimes late at night, weekends. And, we can have marathon calls too. And I just kill the battery on my phone and everything else. But sometimes you can't help but talk that much with somebody you like and get along with, that you don't wander into outside of work topics and into personal interest topics. And as Tom was alluding to, I think like so many people over the last year, well, I'll speak for myself, I certainly became a lot more interested in spirits. And I think Tom was really ahead of me. But being at home, and I think, it changed the consumption habits. I can tell you, visiting some of the spirit stores and stuff, I mean, the shelves are like empty. It's crazy, but everybody's doing everything at home. So it makes sense. There are no bars to go out to hang out, or restaurants to go out with friends and have a good time. Everybody's doing this stuff at home. So I'm guilty of being one of the people that has had their interest increased.
So what you're saying is you could have taken up knitting, or
could have, maybe should have. I don't know. I'm just kidding. I shouldn't have. But
you've done research into the variations of Scotch and bourbons as your vocation, your COVID extra vocation.
Yes, and I don't consider myself, nerdy or whatever, but like everything, when you get interested in it and you start to familiarize yourself with the details of how things happen and how things come about, it really gets a lot more interesting. And I think, that's what has happened, certainly for me. And you and I talk about this all the time, and we like to share with one another what we've tried recently that's good and what makes it good and all this kind of stuff. And, there's infinite material out there. So, I don't know, Tom and I we're talking about having these discussions at the end of the day. So maybe we can sneak in a little.
Yeah. What's the saying? It's 5 o'clock somewhere. I mean, it's 5 o'clock here, but even
still. It actually is 5 o'clock here. So,
West Coast. What I do like about the spirits kind of inspiration is a lot of this stuff now has become craft, right? It's yes, there are the large producers. There are your Jack Daniels, on the beer side, Anheuser-Busch, or
Right.
who owns them now? InBev. Yes, thank you. I read a whole book about it and I couldn't remember the name. Yeah, I mean, you've got the big producers, of course, and some of those big producers help the small producers with their batches and what have you. But the idea of innovation coming from small producers is fascinating. So Matt and I both like to find unique offerings for different spirits, smaller bottles. Like this particular one here, like we said, I mean, they took their rum and they got some barrels and aged it. So their rum starts clear, and the barrel aging process gives it a little bit of that clear. It's definitely not Jose. Wait, what's the rum?
Bravo. No, is that tequila?
That's tequila. It's not Bacardi.
Bacardi?
It's not Bacardi. Nothing against Bacardi, but
right.
You're not going to mistake this for something you'd put in a Bahama Breeze, right?
Right.
And that's the fun of it. So I think I actually talked to the distiller when he said, "Hey, look, we got this small batch coming out," and I, knew you and I both would enjoy that.
Yeah, it's great, and you and I overlap. I think is it fair to say you prefer bourbon? I would say I prefer Scotch. So we have some, good back and forth there about, which is nice because you get a broad taste. You two of us together can share, I guess, with what we're.
Yeah. Well, we got a friend of the firm, a CEO of a credit union in the Midwest, who definitely eclipses us in knowledge and wisdom on bourbons, whiskeys, scotches. But that's the beautiful thing, right? Some of this stuff is shareable. You give a taste to somebody and kind of get a sense of, do you like it? Do you not? So he to reflect on one memorable evening that resulted in me going to McDonald's because I was starving in the middle of the night. But he had is it Lagavulin? Is that what I'm thinking of? The Scotch? And he said, "Have you ever had this before?" I said, "No, I hadn't." And he said, "Well, it's going to taste like rubber tires and Band-Aids, like the plastic Band-Aids. And you'll either love it or you'll hate it." Yeah. And I tasted it and I'm like, I think I want some more of this. It was just a weird, unique taste. And I'm actually kind of glad I liked it because he liked it. So I didn't want to be like,
yeah. No, I have some, not Lagavulin, it's Ardbeg, which is a different, but it's a neighboring distillery, and they make that real smoky, peaty. And it is interesting because it's if you haven't had it, like you said, someone describes it, tastes like a medicine cabinet and an ashtray and, tar and all these, strange, you think it's terrible. But there's something about it. It works, and and that's the smell. The taste is different than the smell, and it's just it's really good. It's complex. It's interesting, and so yeah, it's been fun, kind of exploring all that stuff. And the format that we're on here, Zoom, has enabled that sort of interaction. We've all become. No one heard of Zoom 12 months ago.
Zoom happy hour.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's, you can do, it's been a savior and also, not just a savior, but also an enabler of doing all of these things that you couldn't do. So, yeah.
Oh, so to that point, let me just say this, and then I have a question for you. How many small businesses have been saved because of the technology that's available today? Right? I mean, just think about the fact that even our business, this year, or 2020 rather, to reflect a little bit, has been way different than any year before it in terms of how we've done our work for our clients. And in many ways, it was a savior because it allowed us to maintain a connection and continue to work. But it also made the work so much more efficient in ways where we could see people, work with them, share screens as we've done today. dive into topics in a way that was highly efficient and perhaps even more engaging, certainly more engaging in certain cases in a phone call, and more engaging than, traveling days on end for a 2-hour meeting. Days on end. Although sometimes I think I've done that, but for a 2 or 3 hour meeting to turn around and go home and be so exhausted, you kind of forget the interaction.
Yeah, that's right. And, you mentioned having more time, so for those of us who have been fortunate enough to be in industries or companies, et cetera, that haven't been too negatively impacted. Obviously, we're sensitive to some industries that have just really been decimated. Mm-hmm. That extra time you're talking about, like you just said, the travel time associated with those offsites, driving to and from work in the morning. I mean, what is, I hear a statistic, the average drive in America, 45 minutes or whatever, I know that varies. But, think if you add that up 5 days a week, month on, think about how much time you have reclaimed. And then there's been other, I think we all agree we want kids to get back in class, but, if they've been learning at home, then there's also commutes there that don't happen. So it's interesting. And I think, if you've been blessed enough to not get hurt too bad, you've been able to find some positive ways to use that time.
Yeah, right. To your point, if you're a restaurant, Zoom doesn't really help you fill the seats. Right. There is that. And we absolutely appreciate the challenges there. And I'll tell you, Matt, you and I both know one of our favorite places to go is Texas because of the Tex-Mex. And here's hoping the next time we get down there, those restaurants are still humming along, because the world is a worse place without Texas Tex-Mex food to tuck into when you're in Texas. All right. So here's my question. Go ahead. Yes. I'll give my question for you. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to piggyback on that. You had touched on earlier, we're friends outside of work too. And we've, taken multiple trips for pleasure, not business, with our wives to New York City. When is that going to happen again? Or even when it happens again, when is it going to look like it used to?
As long as there's a pizza oven in New York City, it'll be close. All right. So here's my question.
Pizza that's open in the middle of the night. Right.
Yeah. With the pepperonis, what did you say? The cup?
Right? Yeah. Cup yeah. And just hold all the grease right there.
Perfect. Now I'm getting hungry, so it might be time to end. But here's my question. So this lovely, and I guess I need to add a little more. So we do have end of days. This is the distillery. Again, our podcast is just an homage to the time of the day, but end of days flask here. So I'm going to fill up a little bit with my bourbon or barrel aged rum. What flavors come to mind? Oh, so let me tell a quick story and then I'll ask you the question. We had a dear friend of the firm, longtime senior executive EVP. Actually, we have two EVP friends that are retiring. One retired at the end of last year. One's retiring this July. You know who I'm talking about. But the one that retired in December, we hand delivered to another state. In fact, the state of Texas, an end of days bottle of I think it was vodka, for a celebration of a career that was truly, worthy of a drink at the end of all that commitment. But anyway, I digress a little bit. What is your take on the flavor profile of this barrel aged rum? What do you get when you sip this?
It is real buttery, creamy, like buttery. I guess it's from being in that bourbon barrel. You get some of that kind of caramelly flavor, and then of course in the back there a little bit. That rum. You always got a little fruitiness that seems to come with that rum. But the first thing that hits me is just that velvety, buttery flavor.
It took me a while to put the words together, but it tastes like an adult butterscotch.
Yeah, right. There you go.
That's what I get. That as soon as I thought that, then that's all I can taste is like, this is a It's not the Brock's butterscotch from that big pile of candy that every store used to have back in the day. It tastes like a professional adult butterscotch. I like it better.
Yeah, it's good. People should. I don't know if you can. We're not affiliated with them in any way, other than they are located in the same town Tom is, and they're just a small business, trying to make it happen. So if you're in Wilmington, stop by. Maybe they can go online, order something from them. Their products are good. I mean,
yeah. Or whatever small distiller or business you've got in the community.
Yeah, absolutely.
That as well. But yeah, we definitely like to support the business in North Carolina.
Amazon's going to make it. Target's going to make it. Walmart's going to make it. They're all going to make it.
Amazon, they're on the bubble.
Yeah. On the bubble of taking over every industry.
That's right. Okay.
But that's a future podcast, I guess, maybe.
Yeah, maybe midsummer. We'll see how they're doing. I think real quickly as we wrap up here, our intent is to do these once a month and just dive into the topics of the day and then spend a little time riffing on goofy stuff like we are right now. And I think what we slated for February is leadership and emotional intelligence. So I'm looking forward to talking about that because leadership and emotional intelligence, both as a combined concept, so important when you're heading into periods of time that are uncertain. Now, we've been in one this past year, but no doubt the next year ahead will be similar because we'll be executing new strategies that are the new normal. We'll be dealing with maybe a new regulatory environment. We'll be dealing with stimulus. We'll be dealing with new laws and regulations and the like. So the even keel leader that's emotionally intelligent is the one that will help their institution survive this. So I'm looking forward to that conversation, and that'll be in February. So any parting words, Matt?
No, I enjoyed it. Thank you. Tom, I got to give credit. Tom's the brains of the operation and the technical savant behind the scenes. So appreciate it as always, Tom.
Well, let's see if we can rock out on our official podcast closing music, but I'll hit it until next time. Matt and I'll see you in February.